This is Harsh Rules, I'm Ben Harsh, and today let's learn to play Conflict of Heroes, Guadalcanal. Conflict of Heroes, Guadalcanal was released in 2016 by Academy Games, and designed by Uwe Eickart, Gunther Eickart, and Dean Haley. This game supports up to 4 players and takes about 1 hour to play. The first step to getting familiar with this game is to learn how to read the game's unit markers. The marker I've displayed on the screen is identified as a Marine Rifle Squad. The small number next to the dot is the unit ID. This unit ID is used to inventory all the American markers in the game box. In that way, you can ensure you're not missing any game components. The US forces have a number set that runs from 1 to 38. So when you're counting all your markers and you notice a number missing in the set, you can try to hunt it down. The Japanese forces markers have their own number set to keep track of. For now, let's ignore the naming convention and the number system and just focus on the layout of the marker itself. At first, it might seem like just a bunch of random numbers running around the marker's edge. However, there is a method to this madness. To learn the layout, first let's divide the marker in half. Numbers on the top half of the marker reference the cost of action points and unit navigation. When this unit is activated, it begins with a default 7 action points that can be spent to move or conduct combat. For example, initiating an attack would cost 3 action points for this Marine Rifle Squad. Moving the squad costs 1 action point per hex. These point expenditures are tracked on the green section of the player's track sheet. When the activated unit expends all its action points, the marker is flipped over to the spent side. This indicates that this particular unit has completed its actions for the current round. The unit will be flipped back to its fresh side at the beginning of the next round. Players may use command action points in the blue section to power this unit as well. Command action points, or CAPs, represent influence the player has regarding his forces above and beyond that individual squad's action points. We'll cover off more on CAPs a little later in the tutorial. For now, just remember that each individual unit has a default of 7 action points they can use to take action. Regarding navigation, the arrow at the top of the marker indicates the unit's facing. This is the direction the Marine Rifle Squad is pointed in on the game board. Numbers on the bottom half of the marker all reference combat mechanics. These numbers indicate the Marine Rifle Squad's attack rating, their range, and their defense ratings. Many of the numbers in surrounding boxes are color-coded. The color red indicates a light unit, like soldiers. Remembering this is easy. Just think of blood. Blue indicates a heavy unit like a vehicle. Think of blue steel. With this color coding in mind, let's now look at the attack ratings. For our Marine Rifle Squad, the top number is red and indicates an attack rating versus flesh and blood opponents with bullets and high explosives. The lower rating in blue is for an attack against vehicles and tells you that the Marine Rifle Squad is not as effective versus steel. Range simply means the distance in hexes that the rifle squad can attempt to hit a target. As for defense ratings, this is a squad of men and therefore the numbers are red. The defense rating is the number to meet or beat to inflict damage. All defense categories are divided into 2 sections. The top number is the flank defense and the bottom number is the front defense. Front refers to an attack coming through the 3 hexes in front of a unit. Flank refers to an attack coming from the 3 hexes behind a unit. With these combat statistics, you can now understand the basic combat equation. If the attack rating, plus a roll of 2 dice, meet or exceeds the target's defense rating, then this equals a hit. When a hit is scored, a marker is drawn from the appropriate casualty cup that indicates the damage. While we're on the topic, let's take a closer look at combat. In Conflict of Heroes, combat is as easy as 1, 2, 3. 1. Move into position and establish a line of sight. Line of sight must be unobstructed by blocking terrain and within the unit's range. 2. Hit the target. The unit's attack rating and a roll of 2 6-sided dice must meet or exceed the target's personal defense rating plus any beneficial cover to score a hit. And finally 3. Draw a hit marker and assign damage. The victim draws a marker from the appropriate casualty cup and assigns crippling stats to the target. Or, if you're lucky, they draw a KIA marker and take them out in one shot. If you don't get them with the first marker, a second hit marker will finish them off. But you need to be quick. A player can pay 5 action points and roll 2 dice to try and beat the rally number and shake the marker off. Now that you have a general overview of combat, let's walk through each section to review the finer details. Combat Step 1, Line of Sight. The first step to establishing line of sight is moving into position. Guadalcanal has a variety of terrain that can hinder your squad's movement. The base action point cost for moving from one hex to another is shown in the upper right-hand corner of the unit marker. This Marine Rifle Squad has a cost of 1 action point per hex. However, if the hex being moved into contains rugged terrain, this may cost the unit additional action points. Open terrain, paths, and palm groves do not cost additional movement points. However, picking your way through light jungle, wading through kunai grass, climbing uphill, or moving around a hut costs 1 additional action point per hex. Heavy jungle, surf, swamp, and steep terrain cost 2 additional action points per hex. Crossing shallow rivers costs 3 action points per hex, and deeper rivers may cost 5 additional action points per hex. Also, repositioning a unit costs additional action points. Pivoting in the same hex to change a unit's facing costs 1 action point, and moving backwards costs 1 additional action point per hex. Also remember that a unit's range is critical to establishing a good line of sight to score a hit. With unobstructed line of sight, this Marine Rifle group can attack enemies 6 hexes away. Units can also attempt long-range attacks, but at a penalty of 2 from their attack rating. With this penalty, a unit may attempt to attack a target at up to twice their maximum range. Let's conduct a quick line of sight exercise. In our example, the attacker is a Marine Rifle group, and the defender is a Japanese infantry group. An attacking unit can only fire through its 3 front hexes, which is called its firing arc. Line of sight is always traced from the center of the attacker's hex to the center of the target hex. When establishing line of sight, each time the trace line crosses the center of a hex, that terrain is in effect and can impact sight. In regards to line of sight, or LOS, there is essentially only 3 types of terrain: clear terrain, semi-blocking terrain, and blocking terrain. Obviously, with clear terrain, every time we move the target back, line of sight remains unobstructed. Now let's look at some blocking terrain by putting our Japanese infantry unit in a heavy jungle hex. Our Marine Rifle unit can still establish line of sight with the Japanese infantry unit in the jungle hex. That Japanese unit also gets a defense modifier for being in cover. However, the blocking terrain also stops the line of sight trace line in that hex, which is why it's called blocking terrain. Therefore, if the Japanese unit moves beyond that hex, the Marines then lose their line of sight. Alright then, let's take a look at how semi-blocking terrain works. This time by putting our Japanese infantry unit in palm groves. Semi-blocking terrain like palm groves only provides sparse cover. Therefore, it takes 2 hexes of palm groves to stop the line of sight trace line. In this example, the Marine Rifle unit can establish line of sight in the first palm grove hex. If the Japanese infantry unit moves farther away into the adjacent palm grove, the Marines can still establish line of sight. However, 2 hexes of semi-blocking terrain like palm groves will stop the line of sight trace line. When the Japanese infantry unit moves farther beyond this, line of sight is lost. A final note, when a trace line passes between hexes with blocking terrain, it does not always impede line of sight. If the trace line passes between only one hex with blocking terrain, it does not prevent line of sight. However, if the trace line passes between two hexes with blocking terrain, it does block the line of sight. Revisiting our firefight setup, let's take a look at what we've learned and think about the situation now. The center of the board is a large area of palm grove. I've shaded this area in gray because of the semi-blocking nature of the terrain. Remember, you can only shoot 2 hexes deep into a palm grove. The palm grove is bordered at the top of the map and the bottom of the map with light and heavy jungle. There's also a sort of short wall of jungle branching down from the upper right corner. Let's shade this area in black to represent blocking cover. Remember, we can only shoot 1 hex deep into this type of terrain. Considering the situation, the Marines are much more exposed than the Japanese, who all seem to have good cover. There is also 1 Marine and 1 Japanese unit that have an immediate bead on one another. The remainder of the Japanese are better positioned to deal with the returning scouts more than anything, and they only need to wait till the second round to bring in reinforcements, which can be placed in the cover of the jungle at the top of the board, or on either side of the palm grove as needed to deal with the Marine defenders or the returning scouts. Reviewing this firefight, hopefully you're coming up with your own strategy as we continue to learn the game. You're in position, your line of sight is clear to the target, it's time to take the shot. Most likely, the other player is about to do the same thing to you. You're both no doubt wondering, what about cover? What about cover indeed? The basic attack formula is fairly simple. A base attack rating plus a roll of 2 dice. Total the numbers and meet or beat the defender's defense rating. However, the shot may become a little more challenging once you factor in the terrain defense modifier for the unit's cover. Terrain can be a pain to navigate, but it can be a blessing when taking fire. The best way to increase a unit's defense value is to take cover. Open terrain and kunai grass provide no benefit. And don't leave your units out in the open trudging through a surf or a river because it penalizes your defense value by 1 point. However, swamps, hills, palm groves, and huts provide 1 additional point in defense value, light jungle 2 additional points, and heavy jungle 3 additional points. Keep these different types of cover in mind when staging your attacks against the enemy. You finally scored a hit, or have you? More about that in a moment. Now it's time for step 3, assign damage. When a unit is hit, the player suffering from the attack draws a marker from one of 3 casualty cups. Now the game does not come with cups, you need to bring your own. You will need a Japanese casualty cup, a US casualty cup, and a vehicle casualty cup. The back of the markers have a symbol that tell you which cup the markers go in. Markers with a Japanese flag are for the Japanese cup, the American flag are for the US cup, and an image of an exploding tank for the vehicle casualty cup. Each nation's mix of casualty effects for their hit markers reflects their soldiers' training, combat experience, and leadership. For example, the US troops on Guadalcanal were fresh out of training or had no combat experience. However, many of the U.S. commanding officers and non-commissioned officers were veterans of World War I and the Central American Banana Wars of the 20s and 30s. Therefore, U.S. hit markers have a higher rally value since the raw soldiers relied heavily on their officers. On the other hand, the Japanese were well trained and seasoned from fighting in China, but had little experience against modern weaponry. Their overconfidence and fanatical fighting style caused them to take heavy losses and many times unpredictable outcomes. This is reflected by the no-hit markers that simulate the Japanese unit's willingness to fight to the last man. Many scenarios will dictate the number of no-hit markers to mix into the casualty cup. We'll talk more about the use of no-hit markers in just a moment. Many of the vehicle hit markers are designed around mechanical damage that cannot be repaired on the battlefield. However, some hit markers do impact the vehicle crew's mental state and can be rallied from. Essentially, vehicle hit markers can impact the machines and the men that operate them. A quick trip back to our game setup. Remember the setup instructions for the casualty cups? Let's set those up now that we know more about hit markers. Place all the American hit markers in the US casualty cup. For the Japanese casualty cup, place all the markers except the ones labeled no hit. Then, following the setup guide, place 4 no-hit markers in the Japanese casualty cup. Stir both cups to randomize the markers, and you're all set up for the firefight. When a unit receives a hit, the owner of the unit draws a hit marker from the appropriate casualty cup. That player then looks at the result of the marker and keeps it secret from the other player. If the hit marker is a KIA, the unit is immediately eliminated from combat. Otherwise, place the hit marker face down on the impacted unit. The casualty modifiers in the corners of the hit marker maps to the corresponding stats on the unit marker. The stat in the upper middle part of the marker, it says R equal to or greater than and a number, is the rally requirement. When a unit rallies, they shake off the casualty effect and resume to full fighting strength. To rally, the player must pay 5 action points or command action points. They then roll 2 dice to attempt to beat the rally number. A quick note, if the unit is in cover when they attempt to rally, they get a +1 to their dice result. If the dice total meets or beats the rally requirement, the player can then remove the hit marker. However, if that unit receives a second hit, then that unit is eliminated. Now, let's finally talk about the Japanese no-hit markers. The rationale for keeping the hit markers secret throughout the game is because of these no-hit markers. So, when a Japanese unit is hit and the player draws a no-hit marker, they keep it secret the same as any other hit marker and place it face down on their unit. However, these markers are not real hit markers. Therefore, when the American player thinks they've scored a hit, in reality, the Japanese player is just bluffing. For example, an American player may have to choose between 1 or more Japanese units with hit markers to attack. They may end up attacking one unit thinking they can take them out and not realize it's the other unit with the real hit marker that can be killed. The American player won't realize this until the Japanese unit receives that second hit marker and is not eliminated from the battle. That second hit marker just replaces the no-hit marker, and the battle continues. The maddening thing is that the second hit may be another no-hit marker replacing the first one, and the whole process repeats itself again until you score 2 hits with real Japanese hit markers, or the Japanese player draws the KIA marker and finally kills the unit. Well, we've built a solid foundation by setting up our first firefight and learned the mechanics for units. In the next episode, we will learn the structure of gameplay and how a player can manage their forces and resources through specific actions during their turn. From here on out, everything we learned is going to start coming together. Questions about this game, requests for future Harsh Rules tutorials, and constructive feedback are all greatly appreciated. Hit the like button and drop a line in the comments section. To be notified when future episodes of Harsh Rules become available, subscribe and click the bell icon. As always, I'm Ben Harsh for Harsh Rules. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next episode.